You can physically see the color lines oftentimes.
That's right.
You can physically see the economic lines. And you can physically understand the health realities. And then you overlay the structures of redlining during the 1930s. You overlay the reality of where places are prone to flood. And what we see is that for a very long time, people of color, low wealth individuals have been living in spaces that have been disproportionately impacted negatively by infrastructure investments. And so in this moment, we have an opportunity to really think about how do we center those who have been most impacted as part of the conversation. And that is a grounding for us at Communities First. Even as we think about our names, what we knew politically was that if we were to start to segregate ourselves by race, by economic status, what we would lose is the ability to collectively organize. The other piece that I want to ground is that a lot of this conversation has highlighted kind of funding, particularly because EPA's Environmental Justice Office has had an influx of money. But for us, we are holding community-based organizations more broadly in the conversations about how we organize to meet this moment. And I just want to name that because I think that as we start to talk about who is coming, what does that look like, how people are mobilizing, it is for you to fully lean in or not. But that this money is flowing with or without you.
Talk about it.
And so as part of it, I just want to ground the principles that are guiding the ways in which Communities First is thinking about this moment. We see it as an opportunity to repair past harm, but that is not necessarily how the funding has to flow. And at its core, the reality around how the resources flow in this moment is that Congress gave a whole bunch of carrots but no sticks, in part because much of the bills that I'm going to talk about flow through a bipartisan passage process. So when we start to have a conversation about what accountability looks like, what enforcement tools are in place, how we think about how we do this work, it's going to take all of us to organize in a very different way. I also want to ground the reality for us at Communities First. We see the importance of being able to build out the civic infrastructure. Because we honestly think this as a bamboo moment, and I'm going to explain a little bit more about why the bamboo is what's grounding us. But the reality is this is an opportunity to invest in people, both in the businesses, the collective wisdom, the community, the frontline folks, the folks who are doing the direct organizing. And it's an opportunity to really think about how our collective vision can help to self-determine our future collectively. We are issue agnostic in a lot of ways, but we are very clear about the implications of economic inequality. We are very clear about how race and class has played a role. We are very clear about the climate crisis, and so has this administration. I'll talk a little bit more about that. We are very much looking for ways to really think about proactive collaboration because those are some of the only tools that we have for us to collectively build. And being able to center the wisdom of community as we think about what this looks like in really meeting this moment. For us, how we think about how we meet this moment is really working with the coalition of the willing. It is the network of networks. It's really thinking about how we invest in movement leaders to strengthen the civic infrastructure. Communities First is both a fund that over the next few years will be investing specifically in the Midwest, but in several regions across this country, prioritizing those who are helping to really lean into what it means to create the enabling conditions for systems change. And a lot of the ways in which we are thinking about systems change is really about scale and impact. We have a very short window, and we have to bring along the coalition of the willing, but we see it as a tipping point. Because if we make the case that there's a better way for us to invest, where we all thrive, we can have a different way to have the conversation. And it requires us to really build with the influencers of influencers and the decision makers who are helping to infuse or who are helping to execute the processes that are in place. As we talk about Communities First, our alliance is now the largest alliance supporting the equitable implementation of federal resources. We hold monthly calls. We really talk about what this means to really build out the work. And it includes both technical assistance providers, many of the folks who are in this room, but also it has included organizing with philanthropy and thinking about how we meet this moment. Philanthropic serving organizations like the Funders Network, HEFN, the Neighborhood Funders Group are all partners that we are really seeing as part of the capacity that we will need to really build out the coalition that we're talking about. I want to ground the magnitude of this moment in the bamboo, in part because what is powerful about the bamboo is for the first 5 years you see absolutely nothing. And in the 5th year it grows exponentially, 50 feet in 5 weeks.
Wow.
And what's powerful about it is the fact that below the surface there's an interconnected root system that's allowing for the branches, that is allowing for the bamboo to be able to not be uprooted. It is a grass in a lot of ways, and it's a weed. And regardless of what plays itself out, what's so powerful is that it's stronger than steel because it bends, but it does not break. And in this moment, we have an opportunity to seed the possibilities of our dreams collectively in this room, to really think about how we both harvest, but how we start to seed the visions for this generation and the next. One of the things that I'm holding, and I didn't actually open it up in the land acknowledgement, but one of the things that we learned from our Indigenous brothers and sisters is that they plan for 7 generations out. They are holding that the decisions that they make today literally have an implication for the next 150, 500 years. And in this moment, in this room, what we are talking about with the trillions of dollars is something that we honestly may not see in our generation. And we have a very short window to figure out how we collectively organize so that regardless of what the political winds and cycles are for our nation, we will not be uprooted. But it requires all of us to do our part at the federal, state, and local level so that we can leave a legacy where we can all thrive. So I am going to quickly give you what that looks like in breaking down this money. And more specifically, I want to really talk through the various bills. And I'm gonna start with how we ground ourselves with Communities First. We're gonna start with the ARPA funding, the COVID money, in part because it was the first resources that got passed in the spring of 2021 while we were still in the middle of COVID. And I wanna ground the COVID lived experience because so many of us had to come together because we had no other choice. We also, from an economic, from a public health standpoint, we came together to work on issues that we never knew we could find resources to support collectively. And what the federal government put out was $1.9 trillion by the spring of 2021. And I want to ground what that means in a place like Detroit even right now. Because the last time we saw a package like this, it was also, I'm holding the 2009 rescue plan, ARA at the time. And when they were negotiating it, it was 800 billion with a B. We bailed out the auto industry as we are in a moment where we are seeing strikes happening in this city more specifically. We bailed out the auto industry. We bailed out the banks at a number of $800 billion. The federal government had never put out that magnitude of money at that time. And you're talking about almost 10 plus years later, we were doubling the amount of money just to respond to COVID. And even with inflation, folks would say it would be about $1 trillion, but it was still almost double the amount of money that we use to bail out the banks the auto industry to help us to deal with the pandemic. And that was in the spring of 2021. By the fall of 2021, we then Congress passed the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, the bipartisan infrastructure law. It was at a tune of $1.2 trillion. So collectively, between those two bills, we were already at $3.1 trillion, almost 4 times the amount of money. And I just say it because I don't know about you, but I don't deal with millions, billions, or trillions. But that's how much money is flowing right now. And we haven't fully even opened up the pipeline for how to leverage these resources. I want to put a finer point, because if we were talking about the fall of 2021, last summer, as part of the broader, what at the time was considered and was supposed to be called the Build Back Better plan, there was a larger bill that was supposed to include our social infrastructure. But the only portion that got passed was actually the climate portion. And it was called the Inflation Reduction Act at almost $400 billion. As part of that, the majority of it was a tax credit. But there were some key programs that I'm gonna walk through that you should know, you have to know, to really understand what's coming. Combine these 3 bills plus something called the Science and Chips Act is nearly $4 trillion that the federal government has now passed. And particularly around the COVID money and the infrastructure money, it has to be obligated by 2026. It is 2023, and the reason why there is going to be a potential government shutdown is because they're trying to pass the resources for 2024. So we've got 2 years to spend down $3 trillion and understand how this money is going to support us. It is a very short window. So we all have to collectively organize. That is the urgency that forced us to say we have to come together in this room to meet this moment. Let me break it down a little bit more just so that we're clear. Next slide, just help me out. The reason why we bring up the ARPA resources is because last January, Treasury essentially then gave states and localities the flexibility to use that ARPA funding to invest in water, sewer, broadband, full flexibility, as long as you were thinking about how you wanted to leverage these infrastructure investments. I will be honest, the majority of these resources have been obligated, but it is an opportunity to ask questions about how, because we still have not been able to have a full account for these fundings. Next slide. The other key pieces within the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, there were 480 new programs. 480 programs, 125 new programs. While we can't account for all of the pieces that will center communities, there are some very key ones that have asked for community-based organizations to be engaged in the conversation. BRIC was talked about in the tune of $1 billion. There are also other water resources that are helping to really build in. TA resources as part of the conversation. And so we see about 25 of those programs as areas where communities can really be actively part of that dialogue. Next slide. The other key piece here is really trying to unpack a little bit more around the Inflation Reduction Act pieces, because as part of the Inflation Reduction Act, what was offered is a tax incentive. And for us, originally we said, our communities don't have money to put up front to even have this conversation with the tax benefits. And then Congress came back and, not Congress, the Treasury came back and said, we will do something that we have never done before. It's called direct pay. we will issue out the funding towards the climate benefit portions of a community plan. Let me break it down. So for the longest time in my life, we had a building fund at my church. And for all the turkey, chicken dinners that we had, we still have not fixed that roof. But in this moment, there is an opportunity to stack the tax credits to be able to put solar on the roof, repair the roof, think about how we are transitioning from our gas stove to an electric stove, the church van that we've typically said that we were gonna purchase. If we did it as an EV, we could get a tax credit, and that stack of the different tax credits could be made and paid out directly to a community-based organization that falls in the 501 categories. It also is an opportunity for municipalities to play in a very different way. And this is the first time that the IRS is saying, we will cut you a check in advance.
I'm sorry, can you just rewind for just, rewind that about 30 seconds, Pastor.
So essentially, if I were to go and say, we need a vehicle, and I'm a community-based organization, and I was gonna buy maybe a regular gas vehicle, if I chose to get an electric vehicle, there's a 20% credit. The federal government would give you that 20% so that you could make a different choice in getting an EV vehicle to meet this moment.
In cash?
Yes. That is what we are talking about when we have this conversation. The IRS does not give you a check until after you filed your tax returns. Direct Pay says that if you are choosing to double down on your climate strategies, there's a different investment that could be made in place. And when you bundle many of these tax credits, including the newest one, 48E, it could be up to 70% upfront. It offers us a new way for us to think about how we invest in our communities. But it requires us to have a new language and understand new ways on how to really support this capital stack. Next slide. The other key piece here is that particularly within the Inflation Reduction Act and specifically within EPA, the largest grant program is actually called the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund. It is $27 billion of the $400 billion that we talked about. And the purpose of it is to really mobilize the financing and the capital to address and ensure that we are delivering low energy costs and economic revitalization for communities. I'm gonna break this one down a little bit more. The other key piece is both the Environmental Climate Justice Block Grants and also the Climate Pollution Reduction Grants. So many states have been asked, next slide, to be able to start to think about what their plans look like as part of this conversation. So I'm gonna take them apart real quick. Particularly for this Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund, one of the key programs is Solar for All. 48 states essentially put in a notice of intent to be able to apply for this program. It is 100% low income, meaning that the states are gonna use this money to offer solar panels on every home that qualifies in this moment. But now this is a different conversation about ownership and rentership. It's a different conversation about how we mobilize, and it's also a different conversation about what are the pipelines of projects that could be made available to benefit and pull down the $7 billion that we're talking about. This money is flowing with or without you. You need to understand who has applied, what is the strategy, and how you get involved in really understanding how this money flows. If you think that people are knocking on your doors now to put solar on your rooftop, it's about to be a new day in the next couple of weeks. All of the folks who have been interested in applying put in their application on October 12th. And one of the things that I would say is that particularly in the Midwest, there was a consortium because folks were like, some of our governors have said they're not gonna take federal money. So the cities came together, 20 of them, to put forth an application. particularly for the Midwest. So for this region alone, Solar for All will be a program. You need to understand how to tap into it. The other key program, the other two are a little bit more nuanced, but what I would say is that if you don't know who your community development finance, if you are not in relationship with the CDFI, if you do not have a community bank that you're in relationship with, now may be the time. In part because the federal government is also offering resources for regional hubs across the country and a national green bank that will bring together 2 to 3 entities that will help to support this program. We often say that we don't actually have the financing to be able to pay to play. The federal government is giving $27 billion towards it. You should be part of that conversation. Next slide. The other piece here is unpacking a little bit more about the climate block grant pieces. What I would say is, as Amy talked about, there's going to be $2 billion that is going to be announced in the next couple of weeks. And I want to put a finer point on the timing. Because all of this money has to be obligated, every agency is moving very quickly for NOFOs, projects, announcements. And I know many of you all have said, I've got strangers calling me to put my name on an application. You know why? Because the federal government, particularly because of the Biden administration, has said that we want to hear community voice. We want to make sure that those applications actually are centering those pieces. We have to pick our struggle. Either we're going to decide to engage, or people who have never represented community will be on those applications, because that is part of the process to be able to compete in this administration for being able to have this conversation. I just want to unpack it so that we are very clear about what's happening. This money is flowing with or without you. You have an opportunity to decide how you want to play for your neighborhoods. We were very intentional about this invite, and we are hoping that you take this message back out, and I'm going to explain to you how you engage. The other key piece that I want you to know about is that it is an intentional opportunity that this administration is trying to bridge community and government to come together. So they have incentivized collaboration problem solving grants, government to government, so that we can start to see how this all comes together. Next slide. I love this slide because it helps to tell what the story looks like, particularly around the $3 billion. First of all, EPA and the EJ office, it has grown exponentially because of IRA, but they've never been able to get this much money and put it out all at the same time. And so we talked a lot about the tic-tac, and we're going to talk a little bit more tomorrow about it, but it's really the entry point. If you've never engaged, it's meant for you to understand how to come in. It is the first line to really understand how to meet this moment. And then there's going to be resources, and particularly through the Grant Makers program that we shared would be announced in the next 6 weeks, to resource you to engage. And then it's intended for you to actually pilot and really start to really see what does it mean to be in partnership with your states, with your localities. And you all have been very clear, you are not interested in doing that. Someone else will. I just want you to know, because there's $3 billion out that has to be spent down, with the goal of getting to a place of implementation in the range of $10 to $20 million. Are we clear about what this moment is?
Yes.
Okay, next slide. So on the climate pollution reduction grant, what I would say is every state was offered the opportunity in March to be able to apply. You should understand what your state has actually put out, and you should very much understand how they're thinking about implementation, because there are several billions of dollars to advance their climate plan. How many of you all know about your state's climate plan? Now might be an opportunity for you to engage. If they're not coming to you, this is an opportunity for you to go to them. It is critical. $5 billion is on the table. Next slide. I explained direct pay, but we'll talk a little bit more about how to find it. In summary, it's really about being able to ensure that communities, or that eligible entities are able to take advantage of the tax incentives that are part of the Inflation Reduction Act. Next slide. So I will just bring this all together to say that this administration has been thinking about how you bridge all of these pieces, and it's under the Invest in America banner. It brings together the infrastructure resources and the IRA to really think about how we meet this moment. And I just want to be able to explain the branding, because I know as you've been driving, you see a sign that says Invest in America, and you're like, that sounds great. It is the two bills coming together as part of the Biden branding. On top of that, as one of the first actions that President Biden took, he advanced 2 executive orders that offered an all-of-government approach, both around tackling the climate crisis and being able to advance racial equity and support of underserved communities. And I want you to be able to understand this, because this is why federal agencies are coming to you to have this all-of-government approach. But in the same way that this administration has taken this action, there is also an opportunity for you to have a conversation at the state level. As I shared, 90% of the money actually goes to the state. To date, we have not talked about Justice 40. Do you understand why? Because for us, we are here for liberation of all of the dollars, 100%. And when you talk about Justice 40, in a lot of ways, what that means is we're really talking about the 10% that the federal government has discretionary over. So if we were to organize just around Justice 40, and we have a dollar bill, and 10%, 10 cents, is what the federal government actually has control over, then Justice 40 is 4 cents in this strategy. And it is a beautiful initiative, because it is asking for the federal government to center the communities that have been most impacted. But it is up to you to have a different conversation with the 90 that the states control. And if you don't have that conversation about where the executive orders and actions are, where the all-of-government approach is at your state level, where the advisory committees that are helping to inform the strategies, where the decision-making bodies around these resources, it is your missed opportunity around these trillions. And so I know when we started this conversation to highlight what Michigan was doing, it felt like, but that's not my lived experience. Right now, most states aren't doing anything. And you haven't held them accountable to do anything else. To date, we can't track where the money is, and you don't even know who your infrastructure coordinator is. So if we are going to mobilize for action, it requires a state conversation as well. Next slide. So as I shared, there are a couple key sites that you should know. The first one is invest.gov. And it allows us to both understand where the private investment is happening, particularly on that IRA Inflation Reduction Act piece, and where there is public investment happening, and the amount of infrastructure dollars that are happening. They also have helped to elevate stories. So if things are working, please help to tell the story. Next slide. The other key piece that you need to understand is how all of these resources are coming together, and that is the Thriving Communities Network that we talked about. Next slide. So what that looks like we shared, and I just want to break it down so that we all see it. This is a whole of government approach around federal coordination, particularly on technical assistance. But I need you to understand the principles that are driving this work. How do you scale for impact? How do you build community wealth? How do we center the power of community? How do we meet areas of greatest need? How do we expand access and participation? And how do we diversify knowledge? And I want to call out this line item because where it says diversify the pool of capacity building providers. Today, what has happened is that the same entities that have always received resources are the ones who continue to apply for said resources. And the federal government actually is incentivizing something different. But it does require us to lean into applying to meet this moment. All right? So that is why you're getting outreach from entities who are saying, hey, we want to build. Because there's an incentive to have your voice as part of it. But you have to do your part. And if not you, you need to figure out the who. Next slide. The other key piece is that this investment is happening across the country. Sharice talked about the different ways that DOT is doing it. Every agency is a little bit different, but what I would also say is it costs money to go after the discretionary programs. And what's powerful about the DOT Thriving Communities program is that they're essentially coming in before you have to put in an application. And they're working with both communities, let me pull that out, municipalities, eligible entities, but also community groups who want to collectively say, hey, we have a community plan, but we need support. This application is open right now. $25 million is what's being doubled down to be helping to support those who want to actually build. And so you have an opportunity to encourage your municipality partners to think about that. November 24th? 8th? November 28th. You should know about this. Next slide. The other key piece is if you leave here with nothing, the 3 websites that I need you to know in your heart when someone says, I need to understand what is happening, is invest.gov, because it brings together the infrastructure money and the Inflation Reduction Act money to help you tell the story. It is build.gov, and this is where the infrastructure money is. And they have given you a lot of resources as part of that. A guidebook to help you to understand what programs are available, technical assistance guide for what each state has claimed that they are doing to help to support you in this moment, a state fact sheet for you to understand how much money has been spent in your state to date. So if the state hasn't said it, the federal government has made it available for you. It is because everyone is like, I don't understand which programs are available, what I'm open, what I can compete for. They even have posted every quarter what funding opportunities are available. It's an opportunity for you to get ready. For those who are on the workforce side, they've developed a workforce guide. For those who do rural, they've done a rural playbook. For those who do tribal, they've done a tribal playbook. And for those who are thinking about how do we blend these resources together, they've done an accelerating for infrastructure. There is no reason why by the end of this, you say you don't understand what's happening because it's been made available. We didn't have access to the knowledge, but now you do. The final piece is on the clean energy IRA side. They were like, hey, the infrastructure folks already got it together for us. We could just take the same playbook. So that's what they did. They have a guidebook that explains each of the programs. They allow you to understand which technical assistance is available for you, what resources in terms of funding that's being made available, and also the tax provisions. They start to break down those tax credits that I talk about. Next slide. So in summary, build.gov, you find out where all the money is going on the water, on the transit, on really thinking about environmental justice issues as part of this conversation. Next slide. On that same slide, you can see how much money on the formula and on the discretionary has already been released. And they did one better. You can look by agency and a program so that everything that you need to know is there. Next slide. They also have, like I shared, developed the fact sheets so that if your state doesn't know and you don't know, they've told you, particularly on the infrastructure side. Next slide. The other key piece, like I shared, is build.gov, and it gives you all of the both private investments, because again, if we choose not to organize today, these are gonna be the projects that you're gonna organize around to try to stop. So you should be aware of the private investments that are being made in your community as well. Next slide. So with that, I would like to end this conversation by actually inviting 3 of the folks in this room who are helping to mobilize to meet this moment and being able to help to ground how we collectively continue to build. I want to bring up